an update this evening. So I will begin on formally welcoming you to Dare We Imagine the Island Without an Airport Waterfront for All Speaker Series number 15 with our special featured guest, Marc Ryan, Principal and Co-founder of Public Work. I will give Marc a more detailed introduction in a bit, and I will also introduce our other participants this evening. And we will get underway with our land acknowledgement, which I'm sharing. We acknowledge we are meeting on the land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So I'll just now. So here's how we're going to go this evening. Ron Jenkins, the secretary of our board and a member of the National Sailing Club, and a longtime participant in a variety of waterfront issues, and formerly a featured guest on our speaker series as well, with covering the history of the island airport. Ron is going to give us a quick update on where we stand with the Runway End Safety Area process. If you could unmute yourself, Ron. Hi, Ron. Do you want to say hello?
I'm unmuted, I believe. Yes.
Yes, you are unmuted. That is really good. Thank you. So Ron, I'm just going to ask you to kick things off for us and give us that update. And then we'll have some remarks from Brian Iler, who is also a member of Waterfront for All, and of course also a member of Parks Not Planes, and has been a key player in questions regarding the airport. So we'll go to Ron, we'll go to Brian, and then we'll go to our featured guest, Marc Ryan from Public Work. So take it away, Ron.
I hope you can see my screen here.
Yes, I can.
Sharing working? You're seeing a...
Yes, I am.
Airport view? Okay, great. So I'm just going to give a quick background on where we are with the runway and safety areas. And they are all consequential to the tripartite agreement, which is a three-way agreement between the City of Toronto, Transport Canada, and Ports Toronto. And that agreement governs noise and operating hours. It prohibits flying commercial jet aircraft. It prohibits lake filling and runway lengthening, and it expires in 2033. A new consideration for the airport, however, is the requirement to meet runway and safety area parameters set by Transport Canada and the International Civil Aviation Association, and they have to do that by 2017. This is not a surprise to anybody. But Ports Toronto has slow-walked its response to this. However, what that does require is now that they need to have lake filling and not actually functionally runway lengthening, but pavement in that area as well. And Ports Toronto presented three options in their proposals for RESA. The first is, I call it big, although it's the smallest of the three, it's not the smallest possible. They could have put in emergency material arresting surfaces, but we're getting too detailed there. The middle option is bigger, and the third option is the largest and includes non-RESA additions that are improvements to the airport in the view of Ports Toronto. However, really, we're going to focus just on 1 and 3. RESA 1 adds land on the west and on the east, and together those are estimated to be costing about $61 to $64 million. And then RESA 3 is the more expansive or the most expansive of the options, and it adds more land to the west and substantially, considerably more land to the east. And in addition to the lake filling that they want, they also want to have a 48-year extension to the term of the tripartite agreement. They say that that's necessary to secure the funding that they need for the RESA operations. So what they are attempting to do is to use the RESA deadline to push through a 40-year extension of the city's lease on the airport lands without public discussion. And so that would modify the tripartite agreement to change the expiry date as well as the provisions on lake filling. The city called a public meeting in late September. It was extremely well attended. I've got a couple of images of the room, and that was not all the people that were there. There was an overflow into the hallway at the Intercare Center. And coming out of that was feedback that the City of Toronto collected and compiled into a report that was given to City Council. There isn't any evidence that, at least at the council meeting, that feedback really had been seen by city councilors. And at the council meeting, no councilor was really prepared to stand up to the lobbyists and insist on a serious look at alternative uses of airport lands, a view that was overwhelmingly demanded by the public. And I'm not going to expect you to read the text that I've added here, which is the participant information on alternative visions for the airport that was collected at that meeting. But I will put a link in the chat that you can download this presentation and look at that stuff in more detail. So a city staff report was provided, and in that, the city staff recommended Ports Toronto's option 1 and a modification to the tripartite agreement to make that possible. And they pointed out that should Ports Toronto pursue a RESA option that's substantially scoped beyond option 1, that would require an official plan amendment. So it would be a considerably more complex process. At council, the audience was filled with a lot of people wearing black hats with YTZ on the top. These were the astroturfing representations of Newport Aviation, who operates the terminal at the airport. And the city council, after some discussion, and this is the quick summary, they amended the tripartite, or offered an amendment to the tripartite agreement to permit a landmass extension to meet the RESA compliance requirements consistent with RESA option 1, and not 2 or 3. And in addition, they offered an amendment to extend the term end date in recognition of Ports Toronto's request, at least partial recognition, that they would need additional time to secure funding, financing. But that's a 12-year extension to December 31st, 2045. And in those conditions is also, as the bottom of the page demonstrates or notes, demonstrating a term extension up to no later than December 31st, 2045 is necessary to secure the requisite financing. In other words, they not only can ask for it, but they have to demonstrate that time is needed for financing. And we have a document that suggests quite clearly that it's not. And Ports Toronto replied after that to say that they continue to believe that RESA compliance gives an opportunity to expand the airport, and they offer some suggestions for why. the bottom line there is that Ports Toronto has not given up on the RESA option 3, although City Council has not actually given them a green light on that process. So anyway, just a quick overview of the consultation history that went on. Ports Toronto had a public meeting in July, and then the City of Toronto, with very short notice, called a public meeting, the ones I showed photographs of. That public meeting was held before the staff report was issued, so really the public was working with incomplete information at that meeting. Then the city staff report was issued 3 days later, and executive committee was given 1 working day to assess the staff report before passing it off to City Council, who were only given 5 working days before voting on it. So what you really see is a rushed process. The city is trying to comply or to accommodate the short timelines that Ports Toronto was asking for. And at this point, it was followed by a public meeting by Ports Toronto, public meeting number 2. And the real question at this point is public consultation finished? Because the public in general has not really had a chance to reply or give much input to this process. So there are some links here, and as I said, what I'll do is I'll post a link so you can download this presentation and then use those links in the presentation to look things up if you want to go into it any further. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ron. I really appreciate that. If anyone has questions for Ron, please either raise your hand or put something in the chat. And or if something occurs to you, I will, okay.
And I posted the link there so somebody can download if they want from Google Drive.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Oh, we do have someone who raised their hand. Can we just take that quickly, Brian? Do you mind?
Sure.
I'll have to find, so if you could just, okay, so hang on. If you could just unshare your screen for a second. There we go. Okay. Francis, you raised your hand. If you unmute yourself, we could, you could
right.
Give us your question. Hi.
I'm sorry, maybe you were about to get into this, but I'm wondering what Waterfront for All's plan going forward is to address this. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have no power to address this other than the same advocacy that any citizen has. Right. We're not, just to be clear here, we're not Waterfront Toronto. We are a small community-based group of folks who live along the waterfront from Etobicoke Creek to the Rouge River. And we do, advocacy and raise concerns and issues about the waterfront. That's what we do. So there's nothing we can do that, except collectively, of course, we try to raise these issues. We hold these speaker series and we try to highlight concerns. And we occasionally write letters and make deputations. So that's—
We try to inform people.
Yeah, we try to inform people.
So
and
I guess—
Francis, I will cover some of what can be done in my presentation.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have interrupted. Thank you.
No. I asked for questions, Francis. That's perfect. Pam, did you have a quick question? Do you want to unmute yourself? You haven't unmuted yourself yet. Okay. If you can't, you can just put it in the chat, and I can read out what your question is if that works. Okay, well, just, you know what, Pam, why don't you put it in the chat and we'll let Brian get going, and then we can, yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Let me share.
Sorry, I just unmuted myself. I just thought it would be, I'm on the board as well. I just thought it would be useful for people to understand that Ports Toronto are asking for the 12-year extension, if because they're asking for that so that they can finance even RESA 1. And the city staff said in their report that Ports Toronto can fund RESA 1 on their own. They would not need an extension to the tripartite agreement. And that what staff are doing now is they are re-looking at Ports Toronto's finances and are coming up with an answer about whether they do need a 12-year extension to fund RESA 1 or not. And Waterfront for All, with Ed Hoare's analysis, have produced a paper saying that Ports Toronto can very well fund RESA 1 and do not need a 12-year extension to the Port Authority. So I just don't know whether that was really clear in Ron's presentation, but I think it's a critical piece to the tripartite agreement amendments. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pam. Thank you.
Add that I did put a link to Ed Hoare's document in my document. So if people download it, they can also find a link to it there.
And we can share it too as well. If you want to put the link in the chat, that'd be great, Ron. Thank you. Okay, Brian, take it away.
Here we go. Hi, good to see everyone here tonight. Many of us have been working to close the island airport for a long time. We almost succeeded 20 years ago. Let me move on here. Things aren't moving here. Yes, I hope you can see the screen. Community Air led a fight to stop a bridge to the airport that they told us a bridge was essential for safety reasons. Without a bridge, no commercial flights could operate, and we won the fight to stop the bridge in 2005. So what happened? Ports Toronto ignored the safety issue that the bridge was about and set about drastically expanding commercial operations. The RESA issue is also a real safety issue. Ports Toronto has ignored the need for adequate runway and safety areas for decades. They've been extremely fortunate that no aircraft has overshot, as happened, you see in the picture there, in Vancouver last month. What would happen if there were an overshoot at the island airport? You can imagine. The water is deep off both ends of the runway. So let's move on here. Here we go. So in 2013, Porter said they needed jets to be successful at the airport. We formed No Jets TO to stop them and won 2 years later. It took Porter 7 more years to accept that defeat and begin focusing its operations at Pearson. Several years ago, we formed Parks Not Planes to advocate for turning the airport lands into parkland when the lease from the city ends, and the lease is really the tripartite agreement, and that ends on June 30, 2033, as Ron said. We think those spectacular 2,010 acres should be parkland. There are many reasons. Aircraft engines emit significant amounts of ultrafine particles that are dangerous to its neighbors' health. There's a desperate shortage of parkland in downtown Toronto, particularly now that we seem to be losing Ontario Place. Aircraft noise is above permitted levels. It's unacceptable on a waterfront that is now focused on recreation and residential uses, not its industrial past. It often makes the music garden unusable for concerts. The island airport's business is failing, as Porter incurred serious losses pre-COVID, has cut back drastically on its flights out of the island airport, and now focuses on Pearson. The airport needs huge subsidies, a property tax rate far below what other commercial properties pay, and essentially free use of a huge swath of public land. We were encouraged to see that our view is shared by most of those attending the city's public meeting that Ron described, but we were discouraged that no councillor is prepared to advocate for a serious look at the alternatives. In that sense, the intense lobbying by Ports Toronto worked. You can see the screenshot from their It's My Airport website. We saw their ads all through Facebook and elsewhere. However, thankfully, that lobbying failed in its real goal, to get a lease renewal for decades without any debate. In response, Parks Not Plains did launch and will continue a campaign, It's Our Waterfront, noting that the millions who look to our waterfront for their recreation and the hundreds of thousands who live on the waterfront desire a clean, green waterfront free of the island airport's noise and pollution. So where to now? We know from our successful Jets fight that it takes time and a lot of hard work for public opinion to come around. Council's recent decision does take the pressure off. There's now time to have a fulsome debate on the airport land's future. Note that debate is not one that Ports Toronto wishes to contribute to. Twice, they've canceled speaking appearances where the airport's future might be discussed. Tonight's presentation is a part of that necessary discussion. We need to ensure that city staff don't back down from their clearly stated view that Ports Toronto has the money it needs for RESA 1, Option 1, compliance without any lease extension. We are looking for a commitment from our politicians to work with us to ensure that. And we need to ensure that a proper impact assessment is carried out. The environmental assessment now being carried out by Ports Toronto is compromised by being conducted by the project proponent, is far too narrow in its scope, and can't possibly satisfy the city's official plan requirement for a proper environmental assessment. We've requested Minister Guilbeault to exercise his discretion to order one, just as he did for Ford's proposed Highway 413. For now, let's savor the possibilities as we hear from Marc Ryan on his firm's wonderful ideas for the future of the airport's spectacular lands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. I very much appreciate that. And if you could unshare your screen.
Well,
thank you. Brilliant. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Marc Ryan. I am also not going to read every word of this this slide, but I want you to know that Marc and his firm Public Work were the designers and deliverers of the Bentway, which I think many of you are familiar with. They've also worked to design and deliver the park over the railway between the new CIBC towers, one still under construction, just to the east of Union Station. And they also did the design for One Spadina. This is the Faculty of Architecture at U of T. And in terms of visioning and planning, they did the TO Core vision for downtown Toronto parks and public realm, which is being implemented, passed by council. The plan was approved by council, and it's being implemented, as we go. By council in terms of developing park and public realm, additional and new park and public realm space within the area, basically from DuPont to the lake and the Don Valley to Bathurst, which is what the city defines as the core, downtown. So that is, it's my pleasure that he's here with us, and I'm going to ask him to share some ideas. Oh, I should say something actually. Now, why is Marc here? Now, I don't know how many of you subscribe to the Globe and Mail, but there was an article by Alex Wozakovich, who's the urban affairs and architecture columnist for the Globe and Mail, and it featured some images of what might possibly, island look like if there was no airport there. And sort of the vision that Parks and Not Planes and Brian was referring to a minute ago. And of course, the drawings were produced, admittedly speculative and visionary, were produced by Marc and his team at Public Work. And so we thought, let's have him join us. So here he is. I will spotlight you for you. And here we are. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Edward and everyone. It's really nice to be here with folks who love parks and public space. I was happy to be invited to talk a little bit about, I guess, what was really more of a provocation. And in some ways, you guys, this is what you guys have been doing for a long time, and you've been doing the real work behind these kind of provocations. But I guess we and my team as landscape architects, as urban designers, we felt like it was important to visualize at least what it might be, to think differently about this incredible 85-hectare piece of land at the foot of our city. So I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about this very kind of early, quick initial thoughts that we put together for the article in the Globe and Mail that appeared on, I believe it was October 8th this fall. And then talk to you a little bit about the thinking behind it, and more importantly, maybe have a dialogue about what it might take to create something like this. So when we think about anything really in the city of Toronto, that's where we work and where we live. It's the city we're passionate about. So we're always actually thinking about this in the context of reimagining public space really in our city. And of course, we are a very dynamic city that's changing rapidly. And in that context of our densification, I think we're always trying to, as a practice, we're always trying to pull out and remember that our city is surrounded and immersed by some very powerful landscapes, natural landscapes. Our waterfront, obviously, pulling back our valleys, the ravines. These are some of the, these are the spaces that define us, almost more so than our built form. And we've sort of see the task of, this century being how we can kind of restitch our daily lives and our experiences back into these important landscapes, help them to be accessible by more people and also be sustained in the process. So in some ways, we're always looking at how the larger natural systems of a city intermingle with the urban systems, and how we need to sometimes think about these larger systems whenever we're working in Toronto, anywhere. Every square meter of public space actually matters because it has a relational role. The way things interconnect and can be connected is a really important idea. And I think it's important in the context of thinking about the airport as well. Edward alluded to a project that we did in collaboration with the City of Toronto. It's called TO Core, and it was the first vision basically for all of downtown's parks and public realm in the last 40 years. Amazing, we've gone a long time without one. But what's powerful about it is it was the first time that there was a real holistic view of public space. And it was initiated by the chief planner at the time in 2015. And it involved city planning, urban design, parks, and transportation folks all together around the table. And so that unsiloing of departments was really key. And it allowed us to look more holistically at the public realm and to look at the whole of downtown. And as a practice at Public Work, we've kind of carried that perspective onward to every project we work on, because we start to see the role that certain parcels, pieces of land, whether they're publicly or privately owned, can have and can play in kind of working towards a more vital and connected system of open spaces and public space. So that involves streets, that involves parks, that involves thinking about new kinds of hybrid infrastructures. And the idea of connectivity was one of the really big moves in a downtown that obviously lacks an obvious central park like New York or a very focused kind of open space. In Toronto, we have to look at how one could maybe emerge more informally. And so we started to look at how the valleys, the former Garrison Creek, could be reinforced and interconnected to form a kind of almost like a halo of parks, what amounts to quite a significant open space at around 900 hectares, a kind of massive green space that really encircles downtown. To the north of your screen is DuPont. That in some ways also in our imagination could also form. It's sort of like an idea about our city that maybe we haven't quite ever felt before. But this idea that sort of through the islands, up through the former Garrison Creek corridor, along the former shoreline of Lake Iroquois and that bluff landscape, and then down the valley, that those could all work together to become, a collection of our most diverse landscapes. And of course, there's a whole, the project has a number of scales at it. It also involves a key role for transformative of 12 of our key downtown streets, and a whole thinking about how the interconnection of streets, open spaces, neighborhoods, parks start to get stitched together differently. So this idea of interrelations, connectivity, we can't help but thinking about that when we think about the airport. And of course, in our planning, we were still trying to make those links through the islands and in and around the airport. But the idea, it's almost like when you live in a city long enough, you almost can forget that things can change or that you can unsee things. So this image for us was very helpful to start to see a new perspective of the city right there, that kind of density right at the doorstep. Our islands, stretched out before us. So much care now at the foot of the Don River and the transformation of the mouth of the Don. That's incredible. And then to think we actually are sitting on this other resource of 85 hectares right here. That's about 210 acres. So it was really exciting. Alex Pozikovic, architecture critic for the Globe, as Edward mentioned, saw a very short window of opportunity to contribute to a dialogue that frankly was not happening. Of course, you as a group were leading that dialogue, of course, but it felt like not enough people were talking about the issue. So we were very willing and interested to sort of help by visualizing this. And he simply asked us, what else could you do here? And so, and this was, if some of you saw the piece, it's still available. I think it's on. I don't think it's behind the paywall anymore, so I don't know if you have to be a subscriber to read it. But he wrote a really nice piece. It highlights some of the challenges that already Ron and others have identified. But what we were able to do was start to give shape and form to what could happen instead. And I want to be really clear, like what I want to share is sort of like not a design per se. It's more like a way of thinking about how you might approach this opportunity. So it comes across as a final design, but it's absolutely not the purpose of it. It was really about how actually it's important to sometimes see images of a future of your own city that you become so familiar with. It's important to you need to almost be shocked out of that way you see your city on a daily basis. And so that's what we attempted to do. So tonight I thought maybe I'd just share a little bit of the very quick process. This happened in a matter of less than 3 weeks. That we prepared some visuals that would accompany Alex's story. And basically the kind of underlying thinking was something that kind of stemmed from our work on TO Core. And that's of course the fact that the islands themselves are so essential to Torontonians' collective imagination. And the need for kind of access to them, inclusiveness of those spaces is so vital to our culture. And then at the same time, they are also our escape. And that is like obviously like sort of one of those really rare experiences of in a city the size of Toronto, you know, where you can kind of feel like you leave that buzz of urbanity. I mean, and I think there's always been a tension between how to connect and then this experience of disconnection with the islands. And in some ways, you know, once we get there, we do feel like we are alone on that island, and that has a very powerful there's a powerful landscape experience that really can't be compared to anything quite like it on the mainland. So it's interesting to sort of like toggle between how we could, in a way, conceptually try to keep that feeling of disconnection, while on the other hand, ensuring that this place actually does get experienced by the big and growing city that we are. One of the things I think that's really fascinating about just the morphology of the islands and how they were formed over time as a dynamic landscape is the way the inner shoreline that faces the city is super articulated, has this kind of intricacy of little bays and inlets, and you can kind of get lost in there, and it's super intimate. It's like at the scale of, you know, a person paddling, and then in contrast to that, of course, is that South Shore and the outer experience of like, you know, whether it's the boardwalks or the beaches and just these like massive long views. And so in very few places can you have this kind of like inward back to your city, the skyline, but kind of almost from these little intricate room-like spaces that are where water is at your feet, to then this like these expansive horizon views. So it's sort of a stunning thing to have in a city of 5 million people. And so, yeah, in some ways, like thinking about that, and you hear from more in these aerial images, you really are aware of that, and in some ways how the airport interrupts that, doesn't share any of that morphology whatsoever. But that seemed like something that could be interesting to kind of keep a hold of if you were to almost like think of extending that island morphology. And then of course, like there's that pulling outward view. Also interesting how today, like, because of the way we get to the island, like it's so tethered to Bay Street, the Foot of Bay and the ferry terminal. Now, of course, there's more, there's little water taxis, and people have craft and they're able to get there in different ways, but predominantly we're tethered by the ferry system. And it's interesting how we sometimes don't even notice how much is missing. That like chunk off to the left here, that's there's 210 acres out of the picture. And I guess that was sort of like when Alex asked the question, what could these lands do? Like what could 210 acres that's just off, the foot of Bathurst Street, about less than 100 meters from the city, what could it do? And very simply, I guess we said it could connect. And I think the sort of potential here is that, and here's the sort of like the before and the after, is actually to think about almost like what a metropolitan scaled gateway or lobby space might be from the foot of Bathurst, from the silos, from the parks, little Norway Park, and from that sort of that hub, what could become like a real island hub and gateway, and how that could you could be filtered through a series of landscapes that ultimately have the capacity to hold huge amounts of people for social gathering, for recreation, and in some ways could actually serve a kind of like protective function from some of the other more fragile parts of the islands, because of these close proximity of this piece of the islands. It almost has the potential to sort of work as an antidote to some of the wear that some of the other parts of the island receive. So anyway, a few, again, not a design, but just some of the thinking that went in very quickly, some of the initial thoughts that went into thinking. The first idea was to just begin to work with what's already there. And that included preserving one of the airstrip accesses, preserving all of the hangars, like recognizing the kind of incredible utility of either the surfaces that were there or the structures that were there, and recognizing the really incredible and fragile landscape of the kind of coastal dune ecology here at Hanlan's Point. And of course, and also the amazing subculture of the clothing optional beach, and just recognizing how unique that is and how you need to preserve and protect that landscape and that culture. And Tempelhof in Berlin is like one of those amazing stories. It's so Berlin, about how an old airstrip gets preserved and really is a park for creative culture and the city. And it's just open to all, and you hardly have to do anything. Just allow people to bring their positive energy. So that was sort of one of the lines of thinking. Another was to really keep it open and to keep it diverse. To realize that there could be perspectives here that were very different from the kinds of perspectives you even would get in other parts of Central Island, Algonquin Island, the other areas. That because of your proximity, because of even the axis of the airstrip on that east-west, allowed you kind of views into the bay and views beyond to actually like have these incredible sunrise, sunset moments, like just to like allow almost to read the sun coming around in spaces of a scale that we really don't quite have in Toronto. And so, like creating some spaces where you can just be kind of immersed in sky and in water. The second thing as part of this was to sort of play with the idea, particularly along the airstrip, of keeping things very open and preserving half of that airstrip, and then actually filling stuff up with some substance. And so we kind of were thinking about this axis of preserving the axis of the airstrip, which is, this wide width here. And one is just preserving the axis of asphalt as is, allowing it just to be an open ground for basically all possibility, 1.4 kilometers of anything goes. And next to it, sort of like thinking about almost this idea of a barcode of diverse amenities, whether they're passive or active or cultural or recreational, but to actually break that up into sort of like almost like an abundance of diversity, and really encouraging many people to participate in that. So almost holding ground and thinking of it as a framework for almost like 50 sub-parks within this strip. And then sort of like carving out this one singular space as this kind of very flexible, large field. And so this is at a scale of like more than 30 acres itself. So this is like bigger than Trinity Bellwoods Park, just simply this oval that you're looking at. And to think about how, through the seasons that could be programmed in conjunction with that axis of the airstrip in very different ways, allowing space for kind of events and gatherings at a scale we really don't know, other than you could say like other airfields, right? Like Downsview. But nothing like that in the downtown. And thinking about, how unique that could be in winter, and the kinds of programming and festive celebrations, spiritual stuff that could happen. And here's a sort of look at how sort of like that void of like a large, almost like a meadowscape, could play off of this line of the axis of the old runway, and then almost the barcode of parks that could align it. And that was one of the sort of starting points. Another one was to think about how water could structure the experience, and also to sort of recognize that along that borderline of the old extents of the airport, actually you kind of abruptly see, like along that fence lines, where you abruptly see sort of like the kind of the ecology of the island end. And so we just wondered about the idea of actually letting this piece be another island. So letting the airport become an island separate to itself, with of course maybe some crossings and some ways through it, but actually to disconnect the island, and allow an inlet of water to be a different be kind of live with this structure of inlets that we see along the rest of the islands, but let this one be biofiltered water for swimming. So we would like control the intake and the exit and allow that to be you know, a swimmable bay experience, which we think would be really exciting. And then working on you know, developing floating biotopes and ecologies, sort of like mat wetland ecologies that would also like reinforce and work on aquatic cleansing and enhancing habitat. So that was sort of like another idea. So you're just seeing that kind of like inlet that wraps around. And then, and the interesting thing about that is it makes Hanlon's Point really a point, and kind of returns some of that original like feeling. So there's the point here, and then another point here. And it also starts to kind of control access to how this maybe more intensely used piece and program piece of the islands also doesn't sort of, let's say, have to completely succumb to having everyone like move through all edges of the island, although that would be possible as well. This idea of like how you find orientation and how topography might be part of that is also kind of interesting. And some of this is an example. These images on the right are from some also experience in my previous role as a designer with West 8, a Dutch firm. And I worked for many years on the design of Governor's Island in New York City. That's you know right in the harbor, off Staten Island, off Manhattan, and sculpting these new landforms had a huge effect in sort of changing a perception of the place. And so one of the ideas was to think about building some topography in and around through here, you know, in the excavation of the inlet. And the raising of topography is also in the context of water and storm issues to start to elevate some of the vegetation. So as you planted the new trees for the new future forest, they would be like high and dry and protected. And that was also part of the thinking at Governor's Island. Of course, this is subject to like ocean tidal forces, but nevertheless, there are major flood issues on the islands today that would benefit from some higher elevations. And that would allow also a perspective of Toronto just from a slightly raised vantage point to really experience also the network of islands, to really see all the islands. So you don't have to be on the CN Tower to get a real picture of the intricacy of islands. So there's a before and after. So the idea of like rising up and up here would be the sort of like high points where you could start to get a feel both of the islands and the horizon beyond, and then those views back to the city, which would be stunning. Then in the area where many of the existing hangar structures are located, we just wondered about the idea of really densifying new forms of culture and recreation, sort of in almost creating like a little precinct, sort of structured by like again a kind of an idea about water, but like actually sort of carving in sort of where the ferry arrives, carving in another kind of piece of green infrastructure, which would be like a shallower canal that would actually could potentially be swimmable, could be like a very different kind of feature that's different from a beach, it's different from a natural water course, but it's something sort of more in this highly programmed area. So there's this is sort of one of the like more fanciful ideas that really imagines embedding all these new old warehouses sort of around, like framed within this inner world of water. You know, and then of course there's how can this be productive? How can it be energy positive? How can, so you know, the big open area becomes a geothermal field. How can we think about actually an idea for an island tree nursery where we could grow Carolinian trees, anticipating, you know, the new kind of biotopes that we would expect as temperatures rise, and that that nursery could be used across the islands in Toronto parks, but would also be something you could visit. And that was sort of an idea reference from Mexico City in this image on the right, which is an incredible landscape. And it's actually a city nursery. They're growing trees, and you can see some of those are very mature and majestic. And then there's like constant kind of growing and kind of operations. So that side of things, the operation side is something we also feel has a role here, like how the maintenance and operations of the broader islands is taken care of, that there can be almost like a depot here where, you know, composting is happening, soil building is happening. So there's all the kind of like operational side of things that we think could also happen kind of within this district around the hangars. And yeah, and I think this is sort of like comes above all the others. It's like, this isn't, you know, with a landscape this size, this is a chance for Toronto to sort of dream its own dreams. You know, everything is large in here. You know, like you have Trinity Bellwoods Park right here. You know, you have, you know, Sugar Beach is just a tiny little speck here. You know, so 210 acres is sort of a scale of park that we just don't have downtown. And it would be really exciting to think of a different way that this is kind of thought of and delivered. And also very interesting to kind of for it to be in contrast to the incredible work happening at the mouth of the Don, allowing for sort of like a very different approach, and let those two ends of our downtown almost like be really interesting, contrasting, but both geared around leading with landscape. So yeah, I think, like, you know, it was just, there's the before and there's the after. And again, this is not the answer. This is just starting to pose questions and think about what a solution could look like, and more really, above all, to stimulate dialogue. What we think is really important, you know, just for our city to be dreaming about itself, about its future, and not to think of like our evolution being just sort of ad hoc, but actually just start aspiring to things. And sometimes having an image or two gets us thinking, even if it tells us what we don't want, even if it helps us clarify maybe what parts don't work or what really matters. Yeah, that was where we were going to end. But in some ways, it's amazing how things you never thought could happen, you know, at a certain time, then do happen. And so that's sort of maybe the hopeful side of things, because I know that something like this is not an easy thing to do, and nor does it, and it takes a lot more than 3 weeks. But it's amazing once you start seeing something, yeah, then the dialogue builds, and who knows where it goes. So yeah, I'll pause there, and like, let's maybe like love to hear questions, dialogue, and conversation. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Mark. We're very, very, very interesting. I love it. I'm going to ask if I could ask Brian and Ron and Pam to join us in having a little bit of a response. I'd be particularly interested in Pam, if you could, and if you her thoughts as a long time Toronto Island resident and a member of the Toronto Island community. Pam, are you there? I'll find you here.
Stop sharing too. Shall I do that?
There we go.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
There,
I think igniting our imaginations as to what this place could be is really an important thing to do. The airport's been there so long that people just accept it as it is. And I feel that the pressure on the park is building, on the existing park is building enormously. Social media, people are coming here all the time. They're loving it. And the park is actually, it looks really big, but there's a huge chunk of the filtration plant. There's 3 ESAs. There's the community, although it's really part of the park. It's a big draw in the park. Lots of people come here. It's not exclusive. There are the yacht clubs. So the park is wonderful. I love the idea of more lagoons. There totally magical on the island, whether you paddle down them or walk beside them, and they're full of really interesting water life. One thing that historically around the island was after the rich and wealthy left to go to Muskoka, the island really became a place for people who didn't have a lot of money to have a summer holiday. And I've always thought it would be so fantastic to have some small kind of cabins that were affordable for people who could come and have a summer holiday out of the city proper. The island can just feel so far away from the city when you're here. And I've always thought that it would be really terrific to be able to some sort of a cottage experience for people who don't have a lot of money and don't have cottages and could get away from the city. I think that there's no end of wonderful possibilities. You know, we've talked about having some sort of an iconic building like the Sydney Opera House. I know that there's been a thought that the waterfront doesn't have an anchor. It's kind of got Harbourfront, but Harbourfront's kind of struggling, and it's not really it doesn't have a big presence. So we thought about, you know, is this a place where we could have a City of Toronto museum? We've lost our Marine Museum, and why is the island? Why is Toronto here? Toronto is here because of the island, which was actually just a peninsula, but that's why Toronto is here, and all those stories about the importance of this place in Toronto's history. I would love to see this place become more of the people who are, for instance, our borough politicians. They don't consider this an important place at all. And yet I see tons of people coming from Brampton, and social media is bringing people here all the time. And so I think politically it's undervalued in the broader council realm. I think we need to work at reminding people that this is such a fantastic sort of resource for in terms of green space and interest and biodiversity, that it just has such an extraordinary opportunity. So
Thanks,
that's
Pam.
some thoughts off the top of my head there.
Thanks, Pam. It's, you know, Pam, I actually, my late Aunt Sally lived in Toronto in the 30s, and she met her husband here. He was working, selling furniture at Eaton's. And that's exactly what they did every weekend. In any kind of decent weather, they went to the island. That's where they went because, frankly, that's all they could afford. And of course, it was a totally different environment then. It was that, just as you said, it was everybody's. You know, they couldn't afford to go away. It was outside of the city. It's where they went, and also, of course, to some extent, Sunnyside as well.
Well, I love the image of all the kids on the TTC who had a towel and a bathing suit got to come to the island for free. And that to me was just such a wonderful opportunity and image for this place, that it really is accessible to everybody.
Mark, did you guys think of like having campouts in that big circle from time to time?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, that's a rite of passage, right, for kids to do their overnight on the islands. I don't know, that's grade 6 or I forget when, but yeah, I mean that would be those are the kind of things I think we can't even imagine yet the things that would be possible there. Like it's almost like, you know, it's like you don't get many times to add a 210-acre park to your city. You know, you just really don't. And you're not able to do that every day either. So there's a time when that maybe starts to make more sense. And then there's a time when it maybe almost becomes inevitable. And like Toronto, it's sort of like it's a real question of when that might be or how that could come. But there's certainly no lack of potential of what our citizens as a whole could think of to do there and how they could really enjoy the place. And I think it would be powerful, like as a real original descriptor of like what it means, like a Toronto place, something truly original. I think the islands really stand for something like that.
And Mark, just a quick, practical note. I mean, I'm not asking you to cost this right now, unless you want to just go away for an hour and come back. No. But I would now, given your experience, would it be reasonable to guess that while not inexpensive, that's if we just took your sketch and thought that's the kind of thing we're going to do, right? If we just said that this would be less than the cost of John Tory's original rail deck park idea? Less than $1.5 billion?
Yes, I would venture to say yes. Yes. I mean, it's on terra firma. And it's more about the fact that you could never acquire such a place really in any other way, right? I mean, that was, I guess, the unique moment where Rail Deck Park seemed like it just might happen, right? Where like every land values, all, growth, wealth, everything just kind of combined. But I think, no, this is something that's kind of why there's a way of thinking of like working even with what's there already. There's some ambitious ideas in the sketches that we shared, right? But at its core, it's sort of like how do you you could begin using and enjoying this terrain immediately, right? You could start today.
Yeah.
And that's what Tempelhof also teaches us, right? That's what Dufferin Grove Park teaches us. And you get community people who care about a place and want to put their energy into something, and it's sort of infinite potential. And I think Toronto's really good at that. So the idea of opening up a new kind of landscape with that in mind is very exciting. It's very exciting. Yeah, and I don't think the cost is sort of like, it always comes back to these kind of factors, but I don't think the cost is the factor. It's like more about like when we reach that moment where this is what sort of needs to happen, and just
I think that the economic discussion of this whole thing really needs to be turned on its head, and that the park should be seen as a positive asset for the city, something that would improve property values outside the park, that would contribute better tax revenues on properties outside the park, that would be a positive attractant for tourism and so on. I mean, if the province can contemplate spending $2 billion to destroy a park at Ontario Place, I'm sure that money is available.
So sad, but true. Yeah. You're right, Ron. And you know what? There are economic advisors, particularly in the States, who are getting quite good at quantifying the value of public spaces and parks, in that, on sort of more in those economic terms. So
And
absolutely.
looking at
The same way you can talk about the airport as an advantage, you could also talk about the park as an advantage, right?
And you can talk about the airport as depressing property values and health outcomes as well, and costs associated with those things.
So can we talk a little bit about tipping points? And one of the reasons I talked about the Jets fight and the bridge fight was when we started those battles, we didn't see much hope of winning. It took a long time, and things just came together on both of those to make our victory happen. And I think it's something similar can happen with the airport in 2033. My sense is, Mark, this talk tonight is one of those sparks to move us closer to succeeding. We need a vision. We need to be excited about what can happen there, and we need that makes a huge difference to how we work towards the goal. That and will bring a lot more people and a lot more enthusiasm to it. I love the thought that this is our chance for Toronto to dream our own dreams. That's very powerful, and it will be very useful to us. So thanks for this, Mark.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, a couple of people have raised in the chat. Now, Pam, you referred to it as well, but several other people have mentioned it. One of the challenges is that everyone who's alive today cannot remember anything being there but some form of airport. I read an interesting thing today about the hill of it's called the Hill of Hysteria, talking about when people object to things, right? Like, and it talked about, I mean, of course, people think Amsterdam was a pedestrian, like biking paradise. Well, you go back and look at pictures of it in the 60s and 70s, it was cars, cars, cars. Same with Copenhagen, right? And people object to things until such time as, you know, it happens. And then afterwards they readjust and then go, oh my God, this is so amazing. And it becomes part of their status quo, part of their worldview, part of what they're used to. But there is a great deal of resistance to change. And I think getting over that, what you said, Brian, getting over that sort of hill of objection, hysteria, freak out, no, is, you know, sometimes it seems an insurmountable hill, but we know that it can be done, right? We know we can do it. I also want to note too, by the way, when we hire you to design the park, Mark, I do want those bridges from the new secondary island to the other island. But you know, if we add, as I think some of you know this, if we add, as it were, the island airport to the Greater Toronto Islands Park, I'll say parks, then we get basically we get Central Park. We get Central Park, right? It's the same. It's, you know, give or take a couple of, and of course, remember, you know, marvelous as Central Park is, there's a huge chunk of it that's the, you know, Jacqueline Onassis Reservoir. So you actually, you know, yeah, you get Central Park, and you get more water than Central Park has, even with the Jackie O, and the pond. But yeah, it changes things a great deal. And I do think we're going to need, and I think we'll follow up with you, Mark, too. So I think and Brian, what do you think? And Ron, what do you think? I actually do think we need those. We need those sort of, we need a vision like this to help us think, Mark, and we're very grateful for it. I think it's really important. But we also need a little cheat sheet on like cost benefits of parks, right? Because I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think a lot of our counselors are actually shockingly unaware of that math.
Well,
I also think,
there's a
Go ahead.
lot our counselors are not aware of. But I can see us in terms of next steps starting to work up some materials that draw from what Mark has produced and popularizing the idea of spectacular new park on the waterfront. There's a lot of things we could do.
I think we have such a wonderful opportunity with the tripartite agreement potentially ending in 2033 to make this time a time to rethink this land. And, you know, short haul flights, not good for the environment. This is an industrial use in what used to be an industrial waterfront. And this is no longer an industrial waterfront. And I think that we need people to realize that it is an incompatible use with every other single possible user group around it, except for the minority people who fly through that airport and find it convenient. And it certainly is, there's no doubt about that. But I just think we have to start to work on, and again, I think that these ideas of what else it could be are what's going to help people start to think differently. So, Mark, I agree. And I think that your vision is a great spark. And we actually did Community Air produced a vision that Jerry Engler had put together a long time ago, and I think Max has a garden idea. I mean, we could just pie in the sky and really have some wonderful. I have great faith in public imagination and what can happen, and I I think we have to be cognizant of the Bathurst Key community and the impact on that if this becomes a main route to the island. We certainly need another main route to the island. The island ferry docks are completely inadequate. They're too small. We're getting bigger boats. I don't know how they're going to get more people through those ferry docks. So having another access point, I think, is really great. Um, it's a long island, so for people to be able to access one end or the other or the middle equally is a great idea. And certainly, I mean, I just think that there are some terrific things that we could do here. It's just an amazing opportunity for this city, for the whole city.
Thanks. Walter, Kim, you have your hand up. If I ask you, I think you can unmute yourself. There you are. Yes, Walter.
Yes, and Mark, how are you? It's been
Wow, Walter,
years in the studio.
you made my
Great
this is
presentation.
thank you, my teacher.
Yeah. Oh, well, I tell you, I think the idea that you started with it reminds me of Burnham, make no small plans for the city of Chicago. And that plan is as relevant today as it was then, linking the Cook County Regional Forest to the downtown, getting rid of Midway Airport, creating a green waterfront accessible to all. I think the idea then, the bigger idea is to look at Toronto in the future as a biological city, as a forest city, as London, Ontario has branded itself. Why? Because we want canopy, global warming, we had that control heat, wind, climate, water. The Dutch people, the Danish people are so far ahead of us in visionary thinking. My thinking is starting with Tommy Thompson Park, which is about 882 acres, larger than Central Park, combined with Toronto Islands, with the airport, linked somehow to Ontario Place. You know, I resigned my commission there because of the destruction of Michael Huff's forest. I predicted it was going to be over $2 billion, and that's come true. So we now have the opportunity to talk about this vision, the emerald necklace, the green necklace. I wouldn't fill up this park too much with things. I look at Tommy Thompson Park, and from my view, I would rip up the runway, it's rubble, and I would create a landscape out of rubble, just as we did in Tommy Thompson Park. At LA, the airport is a new LA for rollerblading, you name it, romantic dancing, you name it. Mark, you hit it on the head. There's so many infinite possibilities. But if we can inculcate the idea of the ravines, our urban parks, our new roads, our green roads, linked to the emerald necklace concept of an urban forest waterfront for wildlife and habitat. And where did all those critters go now that we're on Ontario Place, you know? But where would they find home again? In the Toronto Islands Park. The airport, Billy Bishop, has no longer the name. It's the Emerald Park, or whatever we want to call it. But it's habitat. It's wetlands. I'm working on a project now to bring in wetlands to the Toronto Islands using Scottish technology. And I think we have this opportunity to revitalize our aquatic habitat, our terrestrial habitat, our avians, our mammals, and of course for people. And let people go out there and do their own thing. You know, we don't have to have too many objects, with the exception of those hangars. And Mark, the example in Amsterdam, where they took the industrial site and created it into residential communities for artists and restaurants and entrepreneurs. You know, we have some wonderful worldwide examples of recycling existing industrial infrastructure that we didn't seize enough in Toronto. We got rid of our old boat buildings. But here we have the opportunity to really do something fantastic with these domed, semi-arched dome hangars. So, like, having just come from Italy, I'm very impressed with the Romans and what they did with domes and arches. I think we had a chance to be the new Romans, building a new civilization here. Anyway, the Emerald Necklace idea, I think, links in from the Scarborough Bluffs to Tommy Thompson, the Toronto Islands, Ontario Place, the lake, the Humber Lake Parks to the Humber River, the Don River, all part of, in German, a Gesamt, a total green system. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I hope to see you at some point. We'll have a Belgian or Dutch beer.
Look forward to it, Walters. Thank you so much.
Hey, Walter, thank you for saying bluffs, because on behalf of Waterfront for All, I'm on the Citizen Advisory Group for the West Scarborough Bluffs environmental assessment. And to your point, because as we like to remind people, there's 43 kilometers of waterfront in Toronto from the Rouge River to Etobicoke Creek. So if you think of your necklace idea, I guess the rest of it's like the bejeweled string that holds the necklace,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly the
Um,
point.
because we are, within, if all of us live long enough, we are within the foreseeable future of being able to not only, take a watercraft, but to walk or bike from the Rouge River to the Etobicoke Creek. This is something that is in the foreseeable future, like within a decade away from us. Assuming, of course, there's funding, because as we all know, it's wonderful to do amazing visionary plans. It's wonderful to be part of a constructive and creative environmental assessment program. But if nobody writes the check at the end, nothing much happens. So, David, you had your hand up. I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Do you have a question or comment, David? Hello?
Hi there. Yes, so something that the group may not be aware of is that last Wednesday at the Billy Bishop Community Liaison Group, it turns out that Ports has to translate everything into French. And they said that that's going to take them upwards of 15 weeks to get it all, to get the draft EA translated, and even more time after the draft is approved to have it again, anything added to it, translated also. So they were supposed to have the EA out before the end of November. I don't know how this is going to affect their timelines, because they were crying that the timelines were so tight that they had to have City Council approve this back in October. The other thing is, I would really appreciate the assistance of a sound engineer. If there's anyone in the group that knows or could put me in contact with a sound engineer, that would be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave.
Ports Toronto is the author of its own fate. They took so long to get around to thinking about RESAs, and they are running out of time, and maybe they have already run out of time. I don't think Transport Canada would be looked favorably on extending that 2027 date. I think they're stuck with it, and the airport may well have to shut down because they never got their act together.
Yeah. Just wanted to remind anyone has a comment or question, if you'd like to put it in the chat, if you're feeling comfortable with that, or raise your hand.
Just to mention, following on Brian's point, Ports Toronto's estimation for construction times on the 3 RESA options that they provided, the only one that even fits in the timeline now is RESA 1. The others were projecting 3 to 3.5 years. And those projections were made in the spring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, just a couple other things. Mark, we've had a couple of comments in the chat about asking whether there's ever going to be like a gallery-like presentation of some of your sketches and concepts, and or whether they'll be shared again, because yes, it is behind a paywall. It is.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah.
No,
So,
yeah.
and how, and whether we could work with you to facilitate that up to whatever you're comfortable with, right?
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I wasn't planning to. It was really a quick exercise, more to generate that first stimulate the conversation. But yeah, certainly open to talking with your group about what, if that would have any value to you in any way. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. The new regime that's emerging at Harbourfront Center. Ed Hoare, who can't be with us this evening, he's actually his mom passed away recently. It's a funeral and family gathering today, so Ed cannot be with us. but he's in our thoughts. But Ed Hoare has been talking to the new bosses at Harborfront Center, and with the idea that we might do an in-person event. Oh my Lord. We are coming up due for those of you who are here. We're due for an annual general meeting, and we've done them obviously we've done them online in recent years, but we used to do them in person. And we always have an interesting guest speaker or two at those events. So if that comes together, Mark, I can loop back with you that whether we would want to, whether there's anything we could do to put them up in, obviously there's a cost to printing things, but if
So far they're just exist in cyberspace right now.
They just exist in cyberspace. Well, we could put a big screen up. We could project them onto a screen. That's probably cheaper than than paying for high resolution printing.
Yeah. No, but would that be happy for your group to utilize them in whatever way that could advance the cause? I mean, that's what they're there for. So.
Right, because it is, I like the idea of the provocation, right? I like that idea very much. It's people do have to see things,
I would love to provoke something that the city would start to think about this, and city planning, and take the lead on considering what might happen by 2033. There isn't actually very much time to do some, the master plan for the island park's taken a huge long time, probably unnecessarily long, but it has taken a huge long time. And this would be just such a wonderful, fun, but also complex sort of thing for this, but convincing city planning to take it on, or I think we just have to keep, maybe we need to do more talking to the councillors who are disengaged in this. I really find a lot of people don't really know about the island. I know, Mark, you were sort of saying it's so important to so many Torontonians, but I know lots of Torontonians who never think about the island, don't come here. It's a long way. It's expensive to get here. Or they're, busy in their own neighborhoods. So I think it has to become a really big conversation for this city because it's a big opportunity. And I'm not sure myself the best way to go about that unless we can engage some of our city planners to get excited about doing it and making some proposals around it, or whether we start ourselves by holding some public engagement roundtables. And the thing for Waterfront for All is we don't have much money. We'd love everybody to contribute tonight to our speaker series so that we can do this again. But we're volunteers, and I know that where there's a will, there's a way, Brian. We've certainly come a long way since Community Air was started, and we've had many great successes, but I would really just love to see this become a big conversation for this city.
I agree. That's a very, very, very good point. And I think that's how you do it. I mean, we don't have the money to astroturf the way Newport does. Unfortunately, but I think that Pav's right on. You're right on the money in terms of thinking that. A couple of questions have come up in the comments, or comments have come up in the chat about involving more people. And I will say too, optimistically, I've seen quite a bit of interest in social media among much younger folks who are concerned about urban issues. Even some people who've drawn the new subway, the southern subway loop that goes under the island and has a station where the new park would be, and then goes around and connects into the Ontario line and eastward. A little Roosevelt Island action there, Well, actually, at our event we're talking about connecting to the island. One of the people who attended that event and spoke in this section of the event was a guy he and his firm worked on the Roosevelt Island, gondola, and when it was re-engineered. And he was telling us it's actually like comparatively inexpensive to compared to say digging subway tunnels or, other kinds of things, or even apparently cheaper than, a whole fleet of ferries. But there you go. But we certainly, Pam, we certainly need more ferries. We need more ferries. We need ferries to more places, more
They're coming.
destinations.
Yeah.
No, I know, but I mean, absolutely, but you know what I mean, like not just the Jack Clayton Ferry Terminal. That's one of the problems, right? Is it
Oh,
there
yeah.
should
Yeah. No,
like
for
elsewhere,
sure. And Waterfront Toronto has had a marine strategy, which they produced it early on and left it on the shelf for a long time, dusted it off. But really, there's a lot to think about in terms of water access across the waterfront. We've now got Villiers Island that's going to have a lot of people right across the waterfront. And, do we do a jitney type thing that brings people to work like they do in Granville Island? And now they don't get ice in the wintertime. I know that.
no.
But, I do think that there's lots to think about and lots of things to consider. And I kind of agree that less is better in a way right now, that maybe it just letting some things percolate. And I felt that the master plan got too complicated. It was opening so many options, and this would certainly provide a lot of options, but I think we have to kind of put it within a set of principles that the Island Park currently has, and go from there, so that what you're doing is you're protecting some of those principles, or you're standing by them, and using those as guidelines for what happens here. I mean, there's the old airport terminal, which is a beautiful old historic building from the 1930s, and it's languishing on the property. The Ports Toronto moved it, never done anything with it. Those kinds of things could be just, we could have a piece about the role of the airport in Toronto. I mean, it was an important piece. My house comes from the airport lands. It was expropriated when the airport was built. And so, there's some really fascinating history about all of this too. And I think, there's a role for an Indigenous voice in this as well. So, I mean, there's 500 years of history on the island, and it's not really known or celebrated so much. So I think that as a community, we put together some heritage plaques and stuck them up around, and gives people a little bit of history. I'm sure that'll be coming with some of the master plan stuff, but it does, it could inform a lot of what happens down at that end.
What I'm seeing a lot of in the chat is interesting suggestions for promoting the visual presentations of visions for the airport more broadly, into City Hall and so on, to have some kind of an exhibition. I mean, Mark, you underestimate your ability to throw a sketch together and say it only exists in cyberspace, but there's imagination behind that. They're not just, napkin sketches. You can give me as many napkins as you want, and I'm not going to come up with anything like that. So, I think these visions need to be spread far and wide to have a good effect.
Absolutely. Walter, are you going to sponsor the public contest, Walter? You just have to unmute yourself, guy.
Muted.
There you are.
I'm going back to one of the themes that's come out this evening, and Mark has helped generate this, is the point that I made about Burnham in Chicago. There was a time when the merchants of the city of Chicago developed the vision for the plan. There was nothing happening at the municipal level. And we're finding that today. We're so involved with stamping drawings and doing our little box things that the idea of bringing people in the city to talk about a vision for the city, it hasn't happened since David Crombie with the 45-foot height limit. There is no culture in the city right now to talk about the idea of a vision, and whether it's ecological, economic, housing, aesthetic. My goodness, housing is dominating everything right now. I mean, but it's 10 years too late because we lost the vision for housing. So now, how do we regenerate a vision for a green, clean, accessible waterfront, including the airport lands, as part of the bigger Royal Commission? Crombie's vision was a green, clean, accessible, pedestrian-friendly waterfront. And how do we go back to the Royal Commission days that was so positive? Read the report, Regeneration. It's all there. It talks about a new city, a green city, a biological city, an ecological city. That's a vision. Think of Amsterdam, think of Copenhagen, think what's happening in Paris right now. There are countries in the world leading the way, particularly in China, that we are not even in that ballpark. We're not there. We are visionless. And it's happening at the federal level as well. And of course, the provincial level, the vision is the premier. If he wants something, Science Center, gone. Spa in. Greenbelt mine. That's the vision. It comes from the top-down authoritarian government. How do we build a democratic base that which we're part of, that a bottom-up approach to vision? Because it's not going to happen through the city. I think it's going to happen through all our collective efforts to bring awareness to the public and excite with ideas like, Marc is showing. And that's our challenge now. And it's the big challenge for all of us. And we have to get Waterfront Toronto behind it as well, because they just talk about a waterfront vision, but we're talking about a city vision.
Well, thank you very much, Walter, for that. Now, mind you, I will say, in fairness, I know Julie Beddoes in the chat just said, there is a vision behind, the Waterfront Toronto vision, for the West Downlands and the lower part and the Villiers Island project. But I will note, and Julie would agree that what's interesting is that the West Donlands redevelopment started out as talks and ideas led from the grassroots community in the late 90s. Yes, of course, Waterfront Toronto was formed, and they hired, a very good firm to, come up with a precinct plan and the original precinct plan and the vision for the park. But all of those ideas were actually, the precinct plan was a refined professional piece of work, and it was good, but they were all ideas that actually were right there, and the opportunities and obstacles, community-led 3-day planning charrette that happened in 1999, long before, Waterfront Toronto was formed. So I want to support what Walter's saying in terms of, we have the freedom to be ahead of the curve. We have a freedom to define what ahead of the curve means. We have the freedom to suggest ridiculous ideas and good ideas, bad ideas, good ideas, interesting ideas, ideas that may or may not be feasible, to get things rolling and to have a conversation. And it may not happen now. It may not happen until the 2040s. But I'm optimistic, because I agree with Pam. I don't think short haul flights are really in our midterm future, let alone our long-term future. And for those people who say electric powered airplanes, every car in North America and every train and every bus will be electric long before we have viable electric planes, just because physics. So electric planes are a long, long way away. Even people who are like hype it and are into trying to develop them suggest it's 20, 30 years away at least, if not 50. So yeah, it's airports are going to create a certain amount of pollution, period. Even, and plane use is, it is what it is, but it's not. And the other thing I want to point out too, even though we have a lot of cynicism, we've had decades of arguments, ridiculousness, and mistakes on public transit. Despite everything, we are actually spending billions on transit now. And I know the crosstown will eventually open. But my point is that there's actually going to be a huge new transit, developments to Pearson. Pearson is going to become increasingly accessible. And it's not just the Up Express. It's Brampton, it's Mississauga, it's the extension of the crosstown, etc. So, it's for people who, it's any argument about accessibility, I think, is going to turn out to be nonsense in terms of the island, the island airport. So anyway, look, everybody, it's getting later. It's 8:37, and I want to say Thank you, Mark, very, very much for being here. Thank you, Walter, for joining us. Thanks to Ron and Brian. And as Pam said, feel free to support us. I'll just put it, at waterfrontforall.ca. And we scraped this together, and anything you can donate would be greatly appreciated. And please stay tuned. We are planning hopefully a live in-person event, hopefully at Harborfront Center in the new year, probably late January, early February. And I wish you all a safe and happy holiday season. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, everybody. What a lovely
you.
discussion. Take care, all.